You know, usually when we look at an ancient monument, there is this default expectation of just like simple commemoration.
Right, yeah. It acts like a giant stone trophy.
Exactly. You go to a museum or, a historical site and you see a massive obelisk. Or maybe a towering equestrian statue, and the history book just points at it and says, there it is, that guy won a war.
Yeah, it's incredibly straightforward. Honestly, it is entirely binary.
It really is. Winner or loser.
We're basically conditioned to view ancient architecture as just a marker of ego, like a physical manifestation of a conqueror just planting a flag in the earth.
Right. It's a clean narrative. And honestly, it's comforting. We like history to be highly visible, to be neatly categorized into these clear eras of conquest and defeat.
Oh, absolutely. Makes the timeline easier to digest.
But then you step into the world of 3rd century BCE India, you look really closely at the Ashoka Pillars, and suddenly that simple, comfortable historical lens is completely shattered.
It really falls apart.
It does. We're looking at an architectural landscape that is hiding something absolutely mind-bending right in plain sight. Because what if I told you that the most famous monuments in history, specifically these towering Ashoka Pillars, aren't actually monuments at all?
Which is a wild concept to wrap your head around.
It is. What if they are, in fact, architectural code for a perfect society?
Yeah, and to really grasp that, it requires a fundamental paradigm shift. I mean, we have been looking at these pillars for centuries, right? Admiring the stone masonry, translating the edicts carved into their bases, but we've been entirely missing the macro-level blueprint they represent.
Which is exactly why we're here. So, welcome to the Deep Dive. We are so glad you are here with us today, because today we are explicitly laying out a completely new focus for you.
Yeah, we are decoding the Ashoka Pillars not as dusty ancient relics, but as sophisticated, highly engineered architectural blueprints for a moral civilization.
Right. And to do this, we are pulling from a really fascinating stack of sources. We've got peer-reviewed architectural journals, literal historical translations of Mauryan edicts, and some really cutting-edge modern urban planning manifestos.
Well, to completely recontextualize these structures.
Exactly. And let me tell you why we chose this topic and why it is just so vital right now. Because you and I, we live in a world of incredibly fleeting information.
Oh, constant noise.
Constant. We have complex, often deeply frustrating systems of governance, and we are just constantly drowning in digital noise. So analyzing how an ancient Emperor Ashoka, successfully hard-coded values of equality, justice, and human rights into the physical earth,
It's incredible.
well, it offers a revolutionary lens for how we might fix our own modern systems.
So the mission for our deep dive today is to thoroughly deconstruct the mathematical precision of these massive 50-ton sandstone structures.
50 tons.
Yeah.
Just incredible.
Right. And we are going to reveal how they functioned as permanent, interactive civic textbooks. Our overarching goal today is to extract what we can call the 2026 blueprint for modern governance.
I love that. The 2026 blueprint.
Yeah, and we are going to find it hidden right there within ancient geometry.
Okay, let's unpack this. Let's start by redefining the monument itself. Because when we were reviewing the architectural journals for this deep dive, we kept hitting on this idea that we need to stop looking at these pillars as art and start looking at them as data.
Yes. We have to shift the paradigm entirely. If you walk into a museum today and see a piece of ancient sandstone, your brain automatically categorizes it as, art or relic.
Sure.
But that is a profound modern bias.
Yeah.
To understand the Ashoka Pillars, you have to realize they were active functioning pieces of 3rd century BCE public infrastructure.
Right.
They were essentially the world's first smart monuments.
Okay, smart monuments. Let's explore that. Because when you say smart city today, I immediately think of like sensors on traffic lights or centralized data hubs.
Right, algorithms running the grid.
Exactly. Wi-Fi kiosks, tracking foot traffic to optimize bus routes. It's an active, responsive network. How on earth does a giant stationary rock in ancient India do any of that?
Well, to understand that, we have to map out the ancient design logic. Let's look at the context of the Mauryan Empire under Emperor Ashoka.
Okay, set the scene for us.
He ruled over a massive, incredibly diverse territory. We are talking about an empire that stretched from modern-day Afghanistan all the way across the Indian subcontinent to Bangladesh.
Which is just a staggering amount of land.
It's massive, and it encompassed dozens of different languages, myriad cultures, and deeply entrenched differing belief systems.
Right.
So how do you unify a population that fragmented? You certainly can't just send out an edict written on parchment in one language.
Because what, like 90% of the population wouldn't be able to read it?
Exactly, and the other 10% might not even speak the language you wrote it in.
Precisely the problem. So what does he do?
So Ashoka placed these pillars strategically. He didn't just drop them randomly in a field or hide them away in a royal courtyard where only the elite could see them.
Right, they weren't private art pieces.
No, not at all. He placed them at high-traffic trade junctions, major crossroads, and incredibly popular pilgrimage sites. Think of a location like Sarnath, where multiple trade routes converged and thousands of travelers passed through daily.
Oh, wow. So he was looking for maximum bandwidth.
Yes, exactly.
He's basically analyzing the geography of his empire to find the exact spots where human foot traffic is at its absolute peak.
If you liken this to the infrastructure of modern smart cities where, urban planners place data hubs or major civic structures at optimal nodes to maximize reach and efficiency.
Ashoka was doing the exact same thing with ancient geography.
He really was.
Huh.
He identified the major arteries of human movement in the ancient world and plugged his monuments right into those nodes.
He's basically building a physical broadcast network.
Yeah.
But, instead of laying miles of fiber optic cables or putting up cell towers, he's erecting 50-ton sandstone pillars.
And the genius is in the medium he chose to transmit that broadcast. The strategy here relies on a concept called visual literacy.
Visual literacy, okay.
Yeah. Ashoka knew that a vast majority of his population couldn't read the Prakrit script carved into the lower half of the stone.
Right, the actual text part.
Right. So these structures used universal visual geometry at the very top of the pillar to bypass those linguistic barriers entirely.
Oh, that's brilliant.
They functioned as non-digital billboards for human rights. The geometry itself was the primary message.
Okay, I have to push back here, or at least I want to explore the contrast with how we operate today.
Sure.
Because today, if a government wants to communicate with you, the citizen, they use digital tools. We have emergency text alerts buzzing in our pockets. We have politicians arguing on social media platforms. Right. We have digital billboards on the highway. They can change their message every 10 seconds based on an algorithm. It's like a citywide Wi-Fi network of continuous, hyperfast communication.
Yeah, it's unrelenting.
But here's the thing. A tweet or a digital billboard can be deleted, altered, or simply ignored in a fraction of a second. You just scroll past it.
Exactly.
A 50-ton sandstone pillar, on the other hand, demands permanent physical attention. So my question is, does the sheer physical weight and permanence of the medium legitimize the message in a way our modern digital tools completely fail to do today?
That is the crux of the ancient genius. The physical weight absolutely legitimizes the message. Think about the psychological impact on the citizen.
Well,
When a state sends you a digital message today, it feels ephemeral. It costs the state virtually nothing to generate a text alert or a social media post.
right, it's just pixels.
But when a state decides to quarry a 50-ton block of solid rock from the Chunar quarries, transport it hundreds of miles down the Ganges River using ancient barges, carve it with absolute mathematical perfection, and then erect it at the center of your daily trade route.
Wow. Yeah, when you put it like that.
That signals a terrifying level of permanence.
It's a massive allocation of state resources just to make a point.
It tells the citizen, these laws, these morals, they are not a passing political fad that will change when the next administration takes over. They are as heavy, as unyielding, and as permanent as the earth itself.
Man, it's the difference between a politician making a fleeting campaign promise on a late-night talk show and a civilization physically carving its core operational values into bedrock.
Exactly.
It's a completely different level of commitment.
And to truly understand the depth of that commitment, we have to zoom in. We've established the macro level how these structures function as a giant geographic infrastructure network.
Right.
But the micro level engineering of the pillars themselves is where the real blueprint lies. To decode that, we need to examine the actual geometry of these structures from the ground up.
So let's look at the foundation. Because the capital at the top of the shaft, the part that holds all the intricate carvings, always starts with this very specific shape, the inverted lotus base.
A modern, untrained eye looks at that inverted lotus and thinks it is simply floral decoration. A nice aesthetic touch to make the heavy stone look pretty.
Like an ancient hood ornament.
Right, exactly. But The inverted lotus base is not a decoration. It is a deliberate, highly sophisticated civic design tool. It represents the mathematics of universal equality.
Now, I want to clarify this for anyone listening, especially for students, because when we start throwing around terms like geometric precision and civic design tools, it can sound a bit like a dry math textbook.
Fair point.
Let's translate this into a mechanism we can visualize.
Yeah.
Usually when people talk about the lotus, they use the cliche that it blooms in muddy water, right?
Yeah.
Representing rising above the mud of society.
That's the standard interpretation, yeah.
But let's look at it functionally, almost like an architectural shock absorber. Think of a modern skyscraper. The foundation has to have some flex, some resilience to survive an earthquake.
Oh, that's a great analogy.
By making the foundational base of the pillar a lotus, is the monument essentially saying that the common people are the shock absorbers of the empire, that they are flexible, resilient, and bearing the weight of the entire state apparatus without cracking.
That is a phenomenal way to frame it. The geometry reinforces that exact metaphor perfectly.
Really? How so?
Let's look at the shape of the lotus base itself. It's widely described in architectural journals as bell-shaped. It flares out wide at the bottom and tapers up toward the top.
Okay.
In structural engineering, a bell shape creates a visual and literal foundation of immense stability. By placing this wide, bell-shaped lotus at the base of the Capitol, the part that bears the immense visual weight of the animals and the wheel above it, the architects are making a profound civic statement.
They're showing us where the center of gravity is.
Yes, they are communicating that a civilization's true strength, its ability to hold up the heavy, complex machinery of the state, is rooted purely in its lowest strata.
So it's an ancient nod to the working class, to the common citizens who actually make the empire run on a day-to-day basis.
Exactly. Think about the deeply hierarchical societies of the ancient world. How were they usually depicted?
Usually, pyramids.
They were almost universally represented as pyramids. The pharaoh, the king, or the emperor is at the tiny elevated point at the top, and the massive crushed base of slaves, laborers, and commoners is at the bottom, bearing the crushing weight of the elite.
Right. It's a very heavy, oppressive geometry.
But here, the base is a lotus, a universal symbol of purity, growth, and spiritual potential. It suggests that the foundation of a moral society isn't a subjugated underclass. It is a pure, resilient, foundational citizenry.
That completely flips the pyramid dynamic on its head.
It does.
But, I have to play devil's advocate here. We're talking about Emperor Ashoka. This was an ancient emperor, a man who consolidated power through a famously bloody conquest, the Kalinga War.
Which was horrific, yes.
Yeah, it left hundreds of thousands dead. So isn't hard-coding equality into a pillar just state-sponsored propaganda? I mean, how do we know this was a genuine blueprint for justice, rather than just an iron-fisted ruler pacifying a newly conquered populace with pretty geometry?
That is the essential historical context we have to grapple with. You are absolutely right about his origins. Ashoka was a brutal conqueror.
Extremely brutal.
But the historical record, specifically his own edicts, shows a man deeply traumatized by the carnage of the Kalinga War. His pivot to Buddhism and nonviolence wasn't just a political rebrand. It was a desperate attempt to create a cohesive society that didn't rely on constant bloodshed to maintain order.
Okay, so a genuine ideological shift.
Yes. If it were pure propaganda, he would have built monuments to his military victories. Instead, he built monuments to civic duty. And he used mathematics to make the argument undeniable. Let's talk about the perfect symmetry of this lotus base to see how deep this goes.
Okay, let's look at the math.
If you look closely at the carved petals of the lotus base, they are mathematically identical. The spacing between each petal, the specific curvature of the stone, the exact depth of the relief carving it is perfectly symmetrical all the way around the circumference of the pillar.
Which I imagine is phenomenally difficult to achieve with hand tools and chisels in the 3rd century BCE.
It's almost unfathomable.
Right. You make one mistake, and the symmetry is ruined.
It requires immense mathematical planning, incredibly skilled labor, and a zero-tolerance policy for error. But why go to all that trouble?
Yeah, why?
Because this mathematical precision represents radical inclusivity. Think about a circle of identical petals. In a circle, there is no head of the table.
Oh, interesting.
There is no designated front or back of the monument. Every single carved petal represents an equal participant in the broader civic project. Whether you are looking at the pillar from the north, the south, the east, or the west, you see the exact same perfect symmetry.
So no matter what remote village you came from, what trade route you just walked down, or what language you speak,
Mm-hmm.
when you arrive at the pillar, it presents the exact same face to you. You aren't getting the back of the monument or the secondary view.
Exactly. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, Ashoka and his architects were using mathematics and geometry to establish an irrefutable logical argument for universal equality.
How so?
Well, you can argue with a philosophical treatise, right? You can debate the nuances of a religious text. You can certainly argue against an emperor's decree. But you cannot argue with geometry.
Right, math is
A
math.
circle is a circle. Perfect symmetry is an undeniable physical reality. They were encoding the concept of human equality into a mathematical truth that literally couldn't be argued against.
They elevated equality from a political opinion to a law of physics. That fundamentally changes how you view the monument.
That changes everything.
Okay, so we have this foundation. We have this lotus base that establishes stability, resilience, and radical equality. But a society isn't just a foundation,
No, it has to function.
right? A society that just sits there stagnating, even if it is perfectly equal, isn't a functioning empire. It has to actually do something. So how did Ashoka communicate the action required to keep this society alive? That brings us to the element resting right on top of the lotus, the kinetic engine that drives the whole society forward.
The Dharma Chakra, the 24-spoke wheel.
Now, this is probably the most visually recognizable element of the pillars. It's so potent that it's literally the centerpiece of the modern flag of India today.
Yes, it is.
It's incredibly prominent at the top of these structures. But again, following our new paradigm, we can't just look at it as a pretty logo.
No, we have to deconstruct the wheel as a kinetic blueprint. If the lotus base is the foundation of equality, the wheel is the engine of a society in constant, disciplined motion toward justice.
Let's break down that circular geometry. Because you mentioned earlier that pyramids are hierarchical, top-down structures. A wheel operates on a totally different spatial logic.
A wheel is the ultimate geometric representation of the rule of law.
Okay, break that down for us.
Why? Because it is a continuous, unbroken loop. In a perfectly constructed wheel, every single point on the rim is exactly equidistant from the center hub.
So if we use that as a metaphor, the center hub is the law or the ultimate truth of the state. Every single citizen on the outer rim is exactly the same distance from it.
Exactly. It illustrates that justice is not a top-down pyramid where the laws trickle down from the ruler and get heavier and more punitive as they reach the bottom strata. A circle applies to the ruler and the ruled with the exact same precision. As the wheel turns, the point that is at the top eventually rotates to the bottom, and the point at the bottom rotates to the top. Fortunes change, rulers come and go, but the structure itself, the distance from the center, the application of the law never changes. It is the ultimate equalizer.
Here's where it gets really interesting. We were talking about a wheel. The defining foundational characteristic of a wheel is that it moves. It spins. It is inherently kinetic.
Right.
But this wheel is carved out of a massive, heavy, entirely stationary piece of sandstone.
It doesn't move an inch.
There is this incredible visual tension between the absolute stillness of the rigid stone and the perceived movement of the wheel motif.
It's a paradox of motion in stone, and that tension is far from an accident.
It has to be a deliberate pedagogical tool. It's almost like the architects are trying to show the citizens that moral values, things like justice, equality, empathy, cannot just be carved into stone and then passively forgotten.
Yes, exactly.
You can't just write a beautiful constitution, chisel it into a wall in the capital city, and say, okay, we're done here, society is perfect now. The wheel implies that to maintain a moral civilization, those values must be dynamically, continually practiced by the people to remain relevant. You have to keep the wheel spinning.
The stone represents the permanence and the weight of the law, but the wheel represents the active daily participation required by the citizen.
That's a beautiful way to put it.
A wheel only functions if it rolls. Justice only exists if it is actively practiced in the marketplace, in the home, and in the courts. The structure itself is commanding the viewer to take the static law and put it into daily kinetic motion.
Which is such a powerful message for a government to broadcast. The state is essentially saying, here is the permanent framework of the law, but you have to be the engine that makes it work.
And that leads us directly into understanding how the ancient citizens actually physically interacted with these looming structures in their daily lives, because this wasn't just abstract philosophy debated by scholars in a distant palace.
No, it was out in the open.
It was a visceral, highly physical experience in the chaotic public square.
Let's dive into that cultural impact. I want to visualize what happens when an ancient merchant, a farmer,
Mm.
or a traveling pilgrim actually walks up to one of these things. Because we have to remember the scale. We are talking 30, 40, sometimes 50 feet tall.
It's massive.
In the ancient world, outside of a mountain, this might be one of the tallest things a person has ever seen.
The sheer scale is the very first mechanism of interaction. Let's consider the physical alignment with state ideals. When you approach a rigid structure that is 50 feet tall, what is your body physically forced to do?
You have to stop walking, and you have to tilt your head back. You literally have to crane your neck and look upward.
And in doing so, the architecture alters the citizen's physical posture. In the ancient world, as in much of the modern world, looking down is a posture of submission. It is the posture of defeat, of subjugation, of a servant avoiding the gaze of a master. But to read the geometry of the Ashoka Pillar, to clearly see the lotus in the wheel and the majestic animals carved at the top, the state physically forces you to raise your head. It lifts your chin.
By forcing the citizen to physically look up, the state is physically aligning their bodies with the lofty ideals of the empire. It's not just a metaphor. It's literally uplifting them.
It is a posture of dignity. The monument demands that you stand tall, with your head held high, to engage with it. And then, once you are standing tall, you encounter the most astonishing design secret of the Ashoka Pillars.
The Chunar sandstone.
Yes. These pillars were carved from a very specific type of rock quarried in Chunar. Now, sandstone is generally quite porous, rough, and dull. It absorbs light.
It's chalky usually.
Exactly. But the Mauryan artisans possessed a polishing technique that is still somewhat of a mystery to archaeologists and material scientists today. They polished this enormous curved stone shaft to an incredibly high sheen.
How shiny are we talking? Like a polished granite countertop in a modern kitchen.
Like glass. It was polished so perfectly that it acted as a physical mirror.
Wow.
And what's fascinating here is, when you stood before this 50-foot pillar of law, raising your head in a posture of dignity, the stone literally reflected the image of the citizen back into the monument.
It completely recontextualizes how I view public art. You didn't just see the king's edict, you saw your own face superimposed over the stone.
Yes.
But wait, if it's reflecting you, doesn't that feel like surveillance? Like the panopticon effect. For those who haven't taken Sociology 101, the panopticon is that theoretical prison design where inmates feel constantly watched by a central tower, even if no one is in it. It's a mechanism of control. Was Ashoka just building an ancient surveillance state, using mirrors to tell the citizens the empire is always watching you?
That is a crucial question, and it requires us to look at the holistic context we just built. If this shiny pillar were merely a monument to a tyrant, a reflection might indeed feel like a threat. It would be the panopticon. But look at the architectural vocabulary surrounding that reflection. The monument stands on a lotus of equality. It is crowned by a wheel of equal justice. It forces a posture of dignity, not submission. In that specific context, the mirror effect is not surveillance. It is an invitation.
So it's fostering personal accountability rather than fear.
Precisely. The monument wasn't just an imposing external force raining arbitrary laws down on your head from a distant capital. By making the citizen literally see themselves inside the civic framework, it fostered deep personal accountability.
I see.
It visually communicated to the citizen, you are not separate from the state. You are the state. This law is your reflection.
It completely collapses the distance between the government and the governed. It's not us versus them. It's just us.
Exactly.
I want you, the listener, to just imagine that sensory experience for a second. Imagine you are walking through an ancient, dusty, incredibly chaotic market. You hear the noise of 100 vendors haggling. You smell the intense spices. You feel the crushing heat of the Indian sun.
It's overwhelming.
And then you step into the plaza where the pillar stands. You look up at this 50-foot power of law. Your posture straightens. And suddenly, amid all that chaos, you see your own face clearly reflected in the bedrock of your civilization. That is a masterpiece of civic design.
It is the ultimate triumph of visual literacy. Without the citizen needing to read a single syllable of Prakrit, the monument has taught them that they are inherently equal, that justice is a continuous kinetic action, that they possess inherent dignity, and that they are personally responsible for the moral upkeep of the civilization.
Okay, my mind is thoroughly expanded by this ancient brilliance. We've got macro infrastructure networks, mathematical inclusion, kinetic justice, and reflective personal accountability all built into a single rock.
It's a lot to take in.
So, taking all of this, let's pivot. Because at the beginning of this deep dive, we promised a 2026 blueprint. We promised to figure out how we can utilize this specific blueprint for our modern world.
Right, the application.
So what does this all mean? What does this ancient stone mean for us today, living in a world of concrete, glass, and code?
It means we have to radically rethink how we design our modern public spaces and our civic infrastructure. The Ashokan stone textbook model proves unequivocally that infrastructure can be pedagogical. It can actively teach us how to be better citizens.
But do we see that today?
If we look at what we build today, we see a very different set of values being broadcast.
When you talk about civic design teaching us, I immediately think of the opposite of the lotus base. I think of hostile architecture.
Oh, yes.
If you walk through almost any major modern city over the last decade, you see it everywhere. Park benches that have metal spikes or rigid armrests bolted right in the middle of them.
Yeah, it's tragic.
The explicit, undeniable design goal is to prevent a homeless person from laying down to sleep. Or you see concrete ledges with metal studs on them so kids can't skateboard. The architecture is literally designed to communicate a message. Don't linger here. Keep moving. You are a nuisance.
It's the anti-lotus.
It's the exact opposite of an invitation.
It is architecture as exclusion. Hostile architecture is a physical manifestation of a society that values frictionless commerce and sanitized aesthetics over human well-being. Now, contrast that hostile architecture with the lotus base we just analyzed.
The lotus base says, we draw our immense strength from the lowest, most vulnerable strata of society. Hostile architecture says we want the lowest, most vulnerable strata completely out of our sight.
So if modern urban planners and political leaders want to embed ethical frameworks directly into the physical and digital infrastructure of our cities, if we actually want to use the 2026 blueprint, we must stop building hostile spaces and start building inclusive geometry.
What would that look like in practice today? We aren't going to start erecting 50-ton sandstone pillars in downtown Manhattan or London.
Yeah.
How do we build modern public spaces using these geometric ideas?
We can start by fundamentally redesigning our public squares to utilize circular, inclusive geometry directly inspired by the Dharma chakra.
Okay, give me an example.
Think about how a typical modern city council chamber or public park is laid out. We build long, linear, hierarchical benches that face a single elevated speaker or a single massive screen. That layout mimics the top-down pyramid. It enforces a hierarchy of attention.
It tells the audience to sit down, shut up, and consume whatever is being broadcast from the top.
To apply the blueprint, we redesign those spaces with circular seating areas that force citizens to look at each other, equidistant from the center. It subtly, structurally encourages democratic dialogue and mutual recognition rather than passive consumption.
I love that. Form dictating function. And what about the mirror effect? We use a staggering amount of glass and steel in our cities today. Our downtowns are incredibly shiny, but they don't function like the polished Chunar sandstone at all.
No, they function as barriers. Think about a massive corporate skyscraper made of sheer reflective glass. What does it actually reflect?
It reflects the sky. It reflects the clouds.
Right. It reflects other tall, wealthy, impenetrable buildings. It is explicitly designed to look sleek and monolithic. It makes the citizen at the street level feel incredibly small and insignificant.
It's a mirror that reflects the overwhelming power of the corporation, not the dignity of the citizen. You look at it and you don't see yourself. You just see wealth blocking your view.
A true modern application of the Ashokan blueprint would mandate that our civic structures, our city halls, our public libraries, our community centers use transparent or deeply reflective materials right at the human eye level.
Materials that invite you in.
Materials that demand accessibility. When you approach a building of law or governance today, you should see yourself clearly reflected in its foundation, serving as a daily visual reminder that your tax dollars, your vote, and your daily actions are what sustain that institution.
That covers the physical world. But we have to apply this to our digital infrastructure too, right?
Yep.
Because earlier we talked about how a tweet is fleeting compared to a 50-ton stone. But our digital public squares, our massive social media platforms, our search algorithms, our news feeds, they are the new trade junctions.
They are the modern Sarnath.
Yes, they are where everyone gathers, trades information, and forms their worldview.
This is perhaps the most urgent application of the blueprint. Currently, our digital trade routes are explicitly optimized for outrage, division, and anxiety, because those emotions drive the highest metrics of user engagement.
Right.
That algorithmic prioritization is our current hostile architecture of the mind. It puts spikes on the digital park bench so we can't rest. We just have to keep endlessly scrolling.
So how do we fix that using ancient geometry?
The 2026 blueprint would demand that we hard code the digital equivalent of the Dharma chakra into our algorithms. Currently, algorithms create hierarchical echo chambers, where the loudest, most extreme voices are pushed to the top of the pyramid.
Yeah, it's very top-down.
We need digital frameworks, perhaps open source, transparent algorithms that promote a continuous, unbroken loop of factual equity and mutual respect. We need UI design that places users equidistant from the truth, rather than stratifying them based on how angry they are.
It's about intentionally designing environments, whether they are made of sandstone, glass, or thousands of lines of code that assume the absolute best of us and physically or digitally guide us toward our highest ideals.
Which is exactly why these pillars are not dead history to be left in a museum. They are a living, urgent invitation. They prove that building a civilization where justice is as permanent and precise as geometry is entirely possible.
It really is.
Emperor Ashoka achieved this in a massive, fractured, ancient world without electricity, without the internet, and without modern logistics. There is zero excuse for urban designers, tech CEOs, and citizens today not to aim for that exact same standard.
It is entirely possible. We just have to choose to build it. We have to choose to polish the stone or write the code that reflects our true dignity back at us rather than our worst impulses.
It is a living invitation, and it leaves us with a profound question regarding the legacy we are currently building right now.
So,
I want you to consider this deeply. If an archaeologist unearths our modern public infrastructure 2,000 years from now, what social operating system will our physical cities and digital server farms broadcast to them? Will they find a blueprint for equality, or will they just find the rusted remnants of digital noise and spiked park benches?
that is a heavy, heavy question to sit with. What are we leaving behind in the stone? What is our lotus base? I want to thank you so much for joining us on this exploration today. Taking the time to really dissect this topic has been absolutely mind-expanding for me, and I hope it has provided a new lens for you too. If you enjoyed this deep dive and found value in it, please take a second to hit the like button and make sure you subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on more explorations exactly like this one.
We truly appreciate your time, your attention, and your curiosity.
And we have one small favor to ask before you go. Think of your network. Please share this video with at least one person you know who loves history, architecture, or city planning. Send them the link. Tell them you found the blueprint for a better city and start a conversation. Thank you from both of us for being here. We started this whole conversation talking about how we usually expect simple narratives from ancient monuments, how we want history to be a clean marker of who won and who lost. But as we've seen today, the real diagnostic landscape of human civilization isn't found in a trophy of a battlefield. It's found hidden in plain sight, encoded in the mathematical petals of a lotus and the kinetic spokes of a wheel, just waiting for us to finally look up, straighten our posture, and see our own reflection.